much, and good morning everyone again. So I'm going to talk this morning about the UK's regulatory system. What I want to do is to try and give this some context though, around why regulation is important and how it fits into the overall system. I've been very impressed so far in this conference by the knowledge and the enthusiasm that is being shared for what was essentially being described yesterday, which is a voluntary approach, doing it for the right reasons. And of course, we would all endorse the thought that if we can get people to do this because it's the right thing to do, that is the right motivation to do health and safety. However, that will always be an incomplete system. I think yesterday we focused on some aspects of the industries like major hazards where there is a strong incentive from a reputation and a business basis to get health and safety right. But when you look across the whole range of industry sectors that make up the economy of any developed country, there will always be those who want to do it for the right reasons and those who need, let's say, encouragement to do the right things, which is why a regulatory framework will always help to move along those who would otherwise choose to lag behind the rest. So it's in that context that I want to talk about the UK's regulatory system. This is not just about major hazards, this is about a regulatory framework that covers the whole of industry, the whole of the economy, and a set of principles that apply to anyone who operates any business of any kind. Clearly, my own level of understanding of major hazards is the greatest because that's where I came from. That, as a chemical engineer, that's where I've spent most of my career. But I just want people to recognise that this is about the much broader context. Why is it important that we from the UK talk more to other people about our system? Well, because the statistics quite clearly show that the framework of the system that was put in place some 40 years ago in the UK has worked effectively. This is an EU comparison of performance in the member states of Europe in terms of performance delivery, and you will see that the UK is, it appears third on there, but if you look at the countries that appear on this chart to be slightly better than us, one of them we're pretty certain gets there because it underreports. The other one is not always as good as us. We are consistently in the top 3 of that performance table for the whole of Europe. So we have a world-class system. We seek to continue to drive that performance and to improve that performance because what that means in practice is less people dying, less people suffering injuries, less people suffering ill health in the UK every year as we drive that performance forward. And I think it's really quite important that we move away from statistics to remember that every one of the numbers, every one of the fatality reports, and I see every one of them for the UK, is a story of a human tragedy for families and friends, and indeed for colleagues in the workplace when those incidents happen. We believe very strongly the principle that we discussed yesterday about everyone having the right to go home safe at the end of every working day. So, when I talk about what works for us, what I'm trying to do is to place this in the context of what is there in there that others can learn from. I would be the last to suggest that you need to do exactly what we do. That is not what this is about. This is about picking out from this some thoughts and some ideas about what might work for you. But for you to do that, I need to tell you the story. And the story for us is quite a long one. It goes back a long way. The first health and safety regulation in the UK goes back to 1833, when emergencies Factory Inspectorate was created. By 1871, practically all workplaces were covered by some form of health and safety legislation of one kind or another. And we had inspectors, and we still call them inspectors today, although I hope by the end of this 10-minute presentation you'll realise that our people now do very much more than inspect. But even back then, those inspectors took on roles of technical advisors to business, as well as being enforcers of the law. So let's now fast forward to 1970s. By then, what we had in the UK was a very complex system. We had lots of different sectoral regulation for lots of different sectors, different standards. Some sectors didn't have very many standards at all, some had a lot, because most of the regulation was done on the back of incidents that happened and someone feeling the need to do something to stop that ever happening again. So legislation happened in a very ad hoc fashion. So we had too much legislation, not very effective at all. So the foundation of the current system with which we work in the UK was established by the Health and Safety at Work Act, which happened some 40 years ago. So let's look at what that system is about. And it's not a long set of rules at all. It's based upon some very simple but very important principles. The first of which is entirely consistent with what we discussed yesterday. The principle is that the ownership for managing the risk rests with the duty holder. For duty holder, read the leader. It is the leader's job to manage risk in their business. Not for the regulator to tell them what to do, but for the leader to identify those risks and to manage them. The way in which the regulation in the UK was written back in 1974 has proved to be very far-sighted, because what it has done is, because it's non-prescriptive, because it applies across all industry sectors, despite the fact that the shape of our economy has changed quite dramatically in that time, the regulation continues to apply, and apply very effectively to all of the sectors that we cover. It implies and has principles that apply both to employers and employees, and it works on the basis that everyone must play their part. Many other countries have already used the GB model as a basis for their own framework. I know that there are other more rules-based systems elsewhere in the world, but I'm very firmly of the view that this principles and outcomes-based approach is much more in keeping with the sort of voluntary and leadership approach that we were discussing yesterday. But what it does also mean is that it requires a different approach from the regulator. So as you know, I am the chair of the Health and Safety Executive in the UK, and we cover virtually all workplaces. So that means we cover factories, farms, offshore gas and oil, onshore major hazard sites, schools, hospitals. All of those things have to operate under our regulatory framework. And our role as the regulator is to set standards, provide advice and guidance on what must be achieved, inspect and audit the performance. Yes, there is inspection involved in what we do, and holding to account those who do not do what the law requires of them, which is to effectively manage the risks in their operations. But to simply call this inspection is underselling the role. We use a whole range of interventions which depend very much, as I said yesterday, upon the culture of the organisation that we find when we go to visit. Those that are trying to do the right thing, Our role is very much to support and advise and give them encouragement to take the next steps on a journey of continuous improvement. For those who we find that are not complying with the law, then we take a very different approach and a much harder line. Worker involvement is very, very important to our system. People who are engaged in activities in the workplace are often the very first people to be aware of where there are potential problems. But they're also, very often, the ones who can also tell you how to fix it. So we strongly encourage joint working between employers and employees in all industry sectors to work together to solve problems. But as I said, for any regulatory system to be effective and to be taken seriously by those who would choose to ignore it, and that's not necessarily the people in this room, but I'm sure you have all encountered businesses like that, for that regulatory system to work, it has to have teeth, of course. So for the poorly run businesses out there, we are empowered to inspect, to investigate, and to take enforcement action. But our primary objective is to win hearts and minds, as we discussed yesterday, so that employers and employees do want to benefit from working in that safe, healthy and productive environment that we discussed at length yesterday. So this is a delicate balancing act in terms of regulation. It is not all about being the police force of the health and safety system. We're making legislation, we're providing guidance and information. We have to make it simple and straightforward for even the smallest business, and that requires quite a dynamic and complex system. Within the Health and Safety Executive, as some of you in this room are already well aware because you visited it, we have a laboratory that employs close to 400 people out of our total cohort of close to 3,000. We conduct research, they provide technical support, they help in the forensic investigation of incidents, and that is a very strongly interactive system that works in conjunction with that enforcement, regulation and policy development part of our role. And it is that whole spectrum of activities that leads to an effective framework for the whole of our regulatory system in the UK. So how does it work? How does it work in practice? Well, let's look at an example. And I'm going to move outside of oil and gas because I think it's time that we looked at the broader economy. In 2007, we started our conversations with the construction industry in the UK about building the Olympics and Paralympic venues for London 2012. This was a project that started off with a very highly polluted brownfield site in the east of London. When the construction industry looked and projected what was likely to happen if they maintained their current performance level, it became clear to them that there would be a significant number of fatalities in the course of building the Olympics. So we started a discussion with the construction industry back in 2007, and by July 2011, a year ahead of the Olympics and ahead of their schedule, they had built on time, within budget, and with an exemplary health and safety record. The Olympic site was ready for action. So a clear example of where health and safety does lead to business success, meeting the schedule, staying within budget. How was it achieved? Well, in health and safety terms, we worked with the organisations building and staging the games to ensure that health and safety was absolutely integral to the project at every stage. We sat down with them and had those discussions at the start, and our strategy throughout the build part was based on those early interventions, those discussions that we had at the start, to seek assurance, to understand how they proposed to manage the process, and we only inspected documented and visited the site when we knew that there were particular and key high-risk activities taking place. What was very obvious to us from the outset was that there was leadership, there was competence, everyone understood their roles and their responsibilities, and the management of contractors was some of the best that I have ever seen. So not only was the project built on time and within budget, but despite the challenges of a huge construction site, the UK Olympic Games remains to this day the only Olympic project that has ever been completed without a single work-related fatality during the build, or indeed during the execution of the Games themselves. This really brings home how health and safety helps those business objectives. We take a similar approach, as I said yesterday, to all of our activities, and in major hazards industries we take this same approach of going in and talking to them about how they manage their risks, asking them to convince us that they know how to manage the risks and what they're doing, because in a densely populated island like Britain, incidents on major hazard sites simply cannot be allowed to happen, so it has to be a very much more proactive approach, and that is the way that we work with all industries. Our role is to work with them to prevent death, injury and ill health, not to simply move in after the event to find out what went wrong. Have we fixed all of the problems in the UK? No, of course we haven't. We have got a long way to go. But what I'm convinced of is that our regulatory approach, which is proportionate in a number of different ways, works very effectively. It's proportionate to the risk and the hazards in a given sector. It's proportionate to the attitude and the culture that we encounter in the companies. And to deliver such an intelligent regime requires quite exceptional people in an organisation like ours. So we've got a long way to go. It's a continually evolving process. But with the right systems in place, what I do know is that we will continue to do our very best, not only to deliver world-class performance in the UK, but to share our knowledge and to help others to learn from us, and for us to learn from others where there is good practice that we can take on board.